The psychedelic revolution is here. If you want to integrate your visionary experiences into your purpose, get clear on your entrepreneurial path, and help people while you do what you love, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to The Psychedelic Entrepreneur, Medicine for These Times. I'm your host, Beth Weinstein. I'm a spiritual business coach, 3-time entrepreneur, and a lifelong student of psychedelics and sacred plant medicines. You carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times. This podcast will help you to share your medicine so you can create transformation in the world. Listen in on conversations with psychedelic leaders, changemakers, and conscious entrepreneurs who are living proof that a better world is possible when you follow your heart and live in alignment with your soul. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm here with Sarah Howat. Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Beth. I'm super excited.
Yeah, this is going to be fun, experimental. We'll see what comes through. So I want to leave you space to introduce yourself and share where you're at now, what you're up to, where you're at in your life's work, your purpose, your business.
Okay, gosh, where do I begin? So for the last 4 years, I have been practicing as a trip sitter and psychedelic guide, and also as a coach, both for psychedelic preparation and integration, but also just general, transformative life coaching. I also consider myself a spiritual mentor of sorts. And yeah, I do a lot of things. I run events and retreats and workshops, although those have been sparse these days. I'm also a teacher, which I think is a little bit different than a coach. And yeah, I could keep going, but that's the basis.
Great. Well, just so I get an idea of, what you've been up to the last few years and what might be shifting, can you give kind of an overview of where the bulk of your business was and, where that was doing well, and then where it's at now? Like, where has there been a shift?
Well, I think just to rewind a little bit, what I'm doing now is not necessarily what I see myself doing long term or as a greater vision. Like, I think it will always be a part of what I do, but I really see myself teaching and speaking to large groups of people. And that's something that I have had trouble really ironing out the details and figuring out how to make that happen. And so I think where I've gotten stuck, over the past 4 years, I've worked for other organizations that are like a trip sitter network. And during that time, I had clients nonstop, but I didn't have to work at attaining them, really. They were coming through the network, right? So I think my struggle is really in that client outreach and kind of more of the marketing side. And I think more specifically on building awareness around who I am and what I do.
Okay, great. By the way, that's really amazing to be getting clients and not have to do anything and be tapped in all these other networks. I will say it's kind of a lot of people's dreams, really, to not have to do anything and just have clients coming to you. Mm-hmm. So
it's a dream, but it's not always feasible. And I think that's what I realized rather quickly, is that I really lacked in the client acquisition side of things. And especially in the work that we do, I'm really picky about not coming across as salesy with psychedelic work. And so I think that gets in my way a lot.
Yeah, it's a fine line. All of us, including myself, including a lot of my clients, kind of struggle, especially if you're holding this pretty deep healing space. It's kind of this edge of how do I let people know? And then we can get into the whole legality issue as well. But then it's such a sensitive area. No one really wants to be salesy. Mm-hmm. But let's deepen into, I think this would be fun to kind of do this as a experiment. If you could have anything, and you had already mentioned this, what would you like? What is the ultimate dream?
When it comes to career only, or just anything.
It's always interconnected, right? But yeah, Like right now, if there's one thing that, you want to kind of deepen into, like if I had just asked, like, what is it you would like right now? What would that be?
Yeah, right now, I tend to be a very pragmatic person. And so my big vision, that's where I get really stuck is I can't figure out what I want right now because I cannot in my mind's eye like anchor in the vision, the bigger vision into like actionable steps. So I tend to hold really big visions that are like decades out. And I have a really hard time kind of rewinding to the present and deciding what is most important now.
Are you a 7 on the Enneagram?
I don't know my
Like a
Enneagram, but I
manifesting
think
generator?
someone's asked me if I'm a 7 before, so maybe I am.
Like very visionary and, yeah.
Yeah, I
Like,
tend to be a dreamer. Like if you were to ask me what I want, not for myself now, but in 10, 20, 30 years, I see myself as a thought leader, an author. I would love to run some sort of clinic or retreat center specifically around grief and loss. But there's so much more to that. Yeah, I'd love to own some land. I'd love to be able to launch a successful coaching program on my own. There's like a lot of things that I want. That one's, I guess, not so far out, but yeah.
great. I love this vision. And by the way, I love the idea of doing grief work in community in kind of a group setting. That would be amazing. Okay. So, you mentioned having having big visions and then maybe having trouble bringing it all into actionable steps, especially if there's a lot of big visions. So out of all these different things, you also mentioned the coaching program, you mentioned LAN, let's say you had to kind of hone in on one thing that's most alive for you these days, like in the next, 3, 6 to 12 months, like what's the one thing you would really like the most?
Pragmatism out of the way.
Well, I always tell people it's like we have to find this line between really going after our dreams and also being a little practical, but not based on like, I just need money, because that's usually where I tell people, yeah, well, if you just need money, then there's a lot of options for that,
Yeah, and I think I've moved through that stage of the journey.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think, I would really love to launch a program that can be evergreen. That's something that I'd really like to do. Yeah, something that I can still be involved with on a regular basis. Like I want kind of a good mix of something that's evergreen and very hands off in terms of like the marketing and the client acquisition, like a really simple funnel through, but then also something that I can be on a call every week or twice a month, and keep me engaged as well. So something that ignites my passion enough to keep my interest.
Yes. I'm curious, ignites your passion to keep your interest. What is igniting your passion most? Like if I told you, Sarah, I'm going to do this evergreen program for you and snap my fingers and everything will be set up tomorrow, what would this passion be right now?
Well, I've had this idea for a long time of a program. Well, and I've run it for a couple of people, not very many, but just like 3 or 4 people, called Rebel Heart. And it's all around like the feminine path of the spiritual warrior. Yeah, that's the idea. It encompasses grief work, dream work, shadow work, all of the above, prayer, meditation, embodiment. But I also don't want it to be something that's like a dime a dozen. Do you know what I mean? I want it to be something that's unique.
How do you know when something is unique versus a dime a dozen?
I think for me, I typically can feel it if I'm building something and I see something else that closely resembles what I'm trying to build. I usually abandon ship. And I think it's part of my human design. I've had my human design read by someone before, and he specifically said, you're the kind of person that has to create solely from you. And if it feels like there's something else even close to it, like I'll just abandon it and move on to something else.
That's interesting to dive into. Because because I know I hear this from clients all the time, and the reality is there's 8 billion humans on planet Earth, and we are all archetypes on some level, and we're all in this kind of collective experience together, even though we are totally individual on our own sovereign path. So then it's like, how do we navigate knowing like whatever you create is yours, no matter what, but also knowing there's tons of feminine, spiritual, blah, blah, blah type programs out there. But that's kind of where the deeper question is, how do you know when it's yours versus someone else's? Like what lets you know that it's like totally uniquely yours?
Well, I don't know how to answer that question directly, but I will say that I got off social media a handful of months ago because it was distracting me from what I truly wanted, but it was also kind of muddying the water of my own vision. And so I got off social media so that I would not have any other voices telling me how something should be built, so that I wouldn't look out and go, well, now I can't build this thing because that person's doing something similar. Now I'm just not aware if there's something else out there that's like it.
Yeah. Beautiful. And by the way, that is a great, great idea. I usually tell people when they go into what I call compare despair, just like do what it takes to get out of the compare. But let me ask, let's see if there's a good example. Have you ever bought a bottle of water before?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have water that runs out of your tap and wherever you're living right now?
Yes.
Does that water cost you money to run out of your tap?
Yes. Indirectly.
Yeah, indirectly, right? I'm curious, like, what makes you choose a bottle of water to buy?
Yeah, it's the packaging, the branding, something I've heard from someone else, all the basics.
Yeah, I actually have used this water example in the past because let's be frank, as much as we all care about like not wanting to buy things in bottles, etc., pretty much every human I know has at least once, usually very often, buys a bottle of water, traveling, the airport where you can't even go anywhere these days, you have to essentially buy water. But then water's running technically free in, we could find a spring, maybe where you live, there's probably a spring somewhere. But somehow these water companies are like huge businesses, right? Like and there's even new water companies on the market. So I'm just using this as an example to show like, okay, and that's water. It's not even like flavored water or water with a crystal in it or water that's been, Reiki'd or whatever. It's just water.
Yeah.
So I was, because trust me, I struggle with it too. It's like someone else is doing business coaching. Well, there's also 8 billion people on the planet that need whatever it is, help with grief or stepping into their feminine warrior spirit. So I like to just lay that down as an example of like, okay, how to like help shift out of, the compare to, yes, there are always going to be other people doing it. And there's always room for more, because what is going to make you and your program successful is you. Here's another example I like to use. So I'm a student of a course in miracles, and there's a bunch of teachers out there that teach it. And I could just read, the thick volume books, which I actually haven't read. But I resonate more with Marianne Williamson's way of teaching A Course in Miracles than Gabrielle Bernstein. I don't know why, just kind of vibe, like the way they teach. And these are pretty big people that both have, large followings and lots of published books, and, they're actually friends, supposedly. So there's just the awareness that there are that's just one example. There are many opportunities for people to do actually the exact same thing in their own unique way. But let's get back to, if you created this feminine spiritual warrior, feminine path, what was it called? Anyways, this program for feminine spiritual warriors. What would having this alive out there and having it be, like you said, like evergreen, where it's, you could maybe just do a couple calls per month. What would having this do for you?
Well, it would offer, I think, the thing that has lacked for some time, although not so much recently, but for the past few years, excluding the last 6 months, it would bring in more stable flow of income, which if you've ever not known where your next paycheck's going to come from, that stable income can be such a relief when you finally have it. And just the ability to free up my nervous system from that kind of, struggle. It's really the biggest thing. I think just security is really the biggest thing for me. Mm-hmm. Because what I noticed over the past few years when I was really struggling is that you can't create from that place. You just can't, and once you have that security and that stability, it's like, okay, now we feel safe and we can actually create from a grounded place.
Yes, I completely agree. But here's the challenge to that. You could just get a job, right? That's generally, I don't think anything's stable and secure these days, but in general, that would be stable and secure. So then why not just go get a job?
I love that you spell it out instead of say the word.
I won't even say the word. It's like, I also will not say the word RATS. It's so funny.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's our safe word.
I don't want to manifest RATS anywhere near me ever again in my life. or a job.
Yeah.
But yeah, why not? Yeah, why not a job?
I left my corporate job over 10 years ago because I just could not any longer do something that didn't light me up. It was just a non-negotiable for me. That was actually the thing that really sparked, I would say, one of the biggest things that sparked my journey was quitting my corporate job, even before I was on a spiritual path. Just taking that leap and that risk. And then I ran a little craft brewery for 5 years. And it definitely provides more than just the safety and security, but that's kind of the basic need. And then beyond that, of course, is just feeling fulfilled in my work.
Yeah.
And I'm such a truth teller. Like you'll know immediately if I ever tell even a fib. And I can't teach something that I'm not fully aligned with also. Mm-hmm. I can't teach something that I also don't feel like I've integrated, which I think is something that kind of trips me up sometimes, because how do you know if you've integrated something fully?
And that's actually an interesting one that's come up a lot, where I actually talk about that, where it's like, yes, I do agree with like fully integrating, and we're always growing and expanding. So we're constantly integrating. And what I teach is like, okay, we're able to teach and share at the level we're currently at, but you're human, you're going to be learning more, you're going to be having more expansion, you're going to go through more initiations and growth, hopefully easy ones. And there's always going to be like the next level and the next level. So then it's kind of like, well, what lets you know when you're fully integrated? Mm-hmm. So that's something to explore. But I'm curious about, when you mentioned, when I said, what would having this program do for you? And you mentioned security and stability, but then you just also mentioned fulfillment. So why, other than, like I understand a certain level of security and stability by having an evergreen, a program like that, but why that program and why not just a different program? Why not some simple thing that you've run before, or just something that would be easy? Why this particular Women Warrior Path program?
I think that's just the topic that lights me up the most, and that also feels the most relevant to what we're dealing with on the planet right now. I've gone back and forth between teaching that particular course versus just like a more simple grief course that's just related to grief. But that would kind of be wrapped up into the spiritual warrior course. So I've kind of gone back and forth, but yeah, I think it's just the thing I feel most passionate about, feels like when there's nothing left to do but pray and to work in kind of the spiritual realms, when you don't have any other choices in the physical realm, then where do you go? And so I think it just feels the most relevant at this time.
Great. Yeah. So fulfilled and passionate and relevant, inspiring, and also like what the world needs. So, how will you know when you have that, like when you're ready to embrace it and put it out there? Like, what lets you know?
I mean, I think the conclusion I've come to lately is that it doesn't matter. I just need to do it anyways. Like it doesn't really matter if I feel ready. If the call is there to just act anyways. And I do get really stuck on starting things. It does seem to, but it's funny. I also get stuck on finishing things, but I think starting things is the hardest for me to actually build up that momentum. The timing of this call is really interesting actually, because we had the new moon yesterday, and I'm not on Instagram anymore. So I don't really look up astrology. Instagram was my main astrology feed. But I can imagine what it would say for me in this month. And one of the things that I've realized has been lacking for probably over a year is just routine. Having just a standard routine where if I don't have any sense of obligation to another person, I'm not going to do the thing. Having accountability, having a sense of obligation or duty to someone else really gets me going. I like being told what to do. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But yeah, having that accountability. But yeah, starting things tends to trip me up. So to go back to your question, I don't know if there is ever like, now is the time. Like, I think now is the time right now. Whenever that is,
Amazing. Thanks for sharing. So this is interesting. So then the next question is, what is stopping you from starting?
Excuses.
Excuses.
If I'm being really honest. No, excuses, fear. Also, to be honest, like I have all these ideas of what I should do to make this happen. And whenever I'm told what to do, it's funny. I want to be told what to do, but I also don't want to be told what to do. Yeah, I feel like I just get stuck. It's just resistance, it's excuses, it's time. I feel like I need to have all things kind of in the perfect place to even get started. I'm very particular sometimes about my working space. Like I can't work in like public, I can work in a coffee shop, but I can't work at my dining room table. Like it's just, I don't know what that's about, but I think it all just boils down to excuses. And I do think accountability really helps me, because I do have a strong sense of duty to other people. And sometimes that can really, when you're building something on your own and you don't have accountability, it can be really hard, I think.
That's interesting. You mentioned duty to other people. If you stop and feel into this, I mean, there's no one like knocking down your door saying, hey, this has to be done by September 1st. But, like, is this the duty? Is this to you or to others? And the accountability or the lack of accountability, it's like accountable to who?
Yeah. It's kind of like if you go to like a health coach or like a trainer of some kind. Some people are going to really want a trainer that's like soft and nurturing and like encouraging. And other people are going to want a trainer that kind of likes to kick their, can I curse on this?
Yes, curse, please.
Yes, I love cursing.
Yeah. All the time.
Somebody that wants to like kick your ass. And I'm just the kind of person that wants to get my ass kicked. I used to give my old trainer, he was English, and I used to give him a hard time about his accent just so he'd make me do more burpees. Like it's something that motivates me to have someone pushing me. And I don't know, but the thing is like, that's not ideally where I want to be. Mm-hmm. So like, ideally I would love to be so intrinsically motivated that I don't need that. And that is a question I often have, is like, is this something that needs to be healed, or is this just the way that I am? Mm-hmm. Isn't that what we typically ask about ourselves? Like, is this really a default, and does it need to be healed, or is this just how I am and it's okay? So I think ideally I would love to be just so internally motivated that I don't need that. So I guess the question is then, how do I nurture that?
Yeah. And that's the deeper question, is because I do talk about the reality of entrepreneurship. No one's paying us. No one's clocking our timesheet. No one's checking on us. No one's going to get us out of bed. No one's going to make us do anything. And yeah, it's so easy to just be like, I don't feel like it. But then that comes down to like, really the first question is like, well, what is it you really want then? And this deeper question of, okay, is it, you want to be intrinsically motivated enough, or you just want like money or a client? But it's like these deeper layers of like, well, what's really in the way of the program that will lead to the stability, that will lead to the inspiration? So let me ask, go on, please.
Can I add something there?
Yeah.
One of the things that, and this is how I feel like we could probably talk for a long time, and in some ways we'd kind of come back to the same places. One of the things that trips me up sometimes is if I don't have something that motivates me through that like ignited passion, I won't do it. Like, it has to matter so much, right, that I'm going to be willing to do it even if I don't feel like it, right? Like, I've been in some physical pain from an injury a few years ago. And do I want to go to the gym and do the same 5 exercises and just those 5 exercises so that I can heal my body? Not really. I want some variety. I want to do other things. But I also know that the pain is going to get worse if I don't just do it now. And so it's like, for me, it's a matter of finding the thing. Like, what is the thing I want to teach? And the truth is there's a lot of things I feel like I kind of equally am inspired by and interested in. And ultimately, I'd love to teach something that encompasses all of those things, which is, I think, why I lean more towards the rebel heart over just the grief. But practically, it feels like building the grief one would be like a good practice run. So the pragmatic side of me is like, well, I should do that one first, and just work it out. So I was telling a friend the other day, I feel like I'm constantly battling 2 people inside of me that want opposite things, or that kind of see the path to success from opposite perspectives. And sometimes they clash and they don't seem to fit, So yeah, it's like, what do I really want? Well, one of those things is that I have to be super lit up by whatever I'm teaching, or I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to put in the time. And so sometimes it feels like my perspective is like, my peripheral is so wide that I can't narrow down on just one thing and just focus on that one thing.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. I'm curious, who says you have to focus on just one thing? Like, where's that coming from?
Well, luckily I'm a manifesting generator, so I like having a lot of different things to do. Yeah. And that's kind of already, I guess to answer that question from like a realistic perspective right now, I do have a lot of irons in the fire and a lot of projects and other people that I work with, other retreat companies. I work for 3 different retreat companies, and I'm running this program through that coaching company. I don't know if I'm allowed to say who they are, or if you'd rather I not, but just like doing a bunch of different things. And so it feels like I need to just focus on one right now. Like, it would be too much to try to do both,
So, and there's also that reality of, having too much going on and adding a new thing to your plate. But So if you just focused on that one thing, what stops you from just making it purely like all the things you're passionate about together?
Then I I feel like I get overwhelmed, which is why going back to your question about like what's holding you back, and I said excuses. This is like the kind of thing I feel like I always have an answer, for why something. But I do tend to get overwhelmed with a project. I don't know where to start. I don't know what I should include and what I shouldn't include, and then I just don't do the thing because I'm overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's, by the way, this is very normal. It's a loop. I see this all the time. I mean, I call it perfection paralyzation, where it's like, instead of just going and like kind of experimenting and having fun, what happens is people think like, oh, it needs to be this way or this way or this way. And then it's kind of like, oh, if it's not, done right, or if I don't know how to put it together, or if it's not, like fleshed out, then I'm not even going to start. And then it's kind of like they just get stuck on the loop and then nothing happens. So there's that, which is the reality of where you're at. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's actually very normal. But what if you just experimented and like threw it out there for the hell of it? Like didn't even plan it out. Just said like, hey, I'm going to launch this program and here's what I imagine, like, who's it for? What's it about? Just kind of the gist of it, and just experiment it. And let's say you did this just for the hell of it. Like, would that be a little more doable? Or is there some, like, I wonder where the fear is coming in, or like the kind of overwhelm?
No, I think shifting the mindset from one of like having to get it all ironed out perfectly before it sees the light of day. I've done both extremes, I think. Like I'll take really like too much time sometimes with something, or I don't take any time at all and then it just flops, So I think that I've had many like failures to launch before. And so there's a part of me that wants to make sure that I do it, that I give it its proper attention, and don't just like flippantly put something out there. I do have a plan actually on getting this done in the next few weeks. And I think I can do it. So that I was going to say earlier, that's why it's funny we're having this call now. Cause today I was like, all right, starting my morning routine today. I'm going to do morning routine, evening routine. I'm going to write for an hour, and like just making sure that I get some momentum on more of that like masculine structure, so that I'm seated at my desk doing work and not like, oh, I'm going to take a call and I'm going to go on a walk over here, and just waste my time because I'm overwhelmed. Just like sit down and start doing it.
Yeah. And here's the thing, the overwhelm it's very normal. I mean, I see this a lot, especially our world that we're in today. And yeah, there's a certain level of like structure needed, and also time for, whatever you really want that supports you. So I'm a fan of like finding the middle ground of like, it's not about just being fully structured, but having something that works for all of you. Because what happens is, if people go from like full, like the way they were, to like this full, like, okay, now I'm going to add like the morning routine and this and that and this and that. What happens is then they might, I mean, not always, but often they get burnout, because then it becomes like the extreme opposite. But it's like, maybe it's taking a wider look at the way things run, where it's like certain days you don't take calls, or certain days are just for creation, or, like I personally will have to like shut off my email, text, like I don't get any notifications, and it's just like disconnect time where I don't care what happens. I'm just focused on creating or whatever it is. So that's what I always say is like, it's not just about like having the structure, but it's about looking at holistically, like what is really in the way of your time to give to this? Is it that you're being like pulled, where's this kind of like deepening into where's the overwhelm coming from? Is the overwhelm outside forces or inside forces? Or is it overwhelmed just with all the, like, I should be doing this, or I should be doing that? I'm curious, like, does anything come up here around that? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think it's internal Definitely internal overwhelm. Sometimes external, of course, but it's not so much the case these days, more internal. And yeah, what was your other part? The other part of your question? You mentioned the shoulds. I definitely struggle with shoulds, like thinking that I need to do something a certain way, or yeah, I kind of get locked in a box in my mind. I think about how I should go about building this or what it should look like. Which again is why I got off social media, so I wasn't comparing anything, to other people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like where does the should come from? Is it the other people, or is it, past experience? Because here's the thing, like I think every entrepreneur out there, including myself, has like what we might call like failed programs or failed launches. And I hate to even use that word. But sometimes things don't work out the way we want, and that's that. But it doesn't mean that they're a failure. It just means like maybe it's something else, or maybe it's the wrong timing, or maybe it just needs to be tweaked in some way. But there used to actually be a term for it out there in the coaching industry called launch trauma. And I hated when people said that, but it's good to recognize, just because maybe something didn't work out great in the past doesn't mean it can't work great in the future. I had a program I launched once that was, it was like for multiple reasons, just didn't go so well, and I ran it anyways, but it was like, and then I ran it a year later and it was amazing. And the only thing that changed was my own attitude about it. It was like kind of that same thing where back when I launched it that one time, I wasn't really into it. And when I launched it again, I made sure I was really like ready for it, So it was kind of like an internal, it's like you said, like finding that passion and motivation. But then, it's kind of like that to me is always the deeper root of like, if there's overwhelm or if there's fear of getting it perfect, or how do I even take the first steps? If you're feeling inspired and passionate and motivated by it, it's like, well, what if you just took out all the like, will this work? Is this perfect? Is it, the right price, the right timing? Is this the shoulds, like I should do it this way. What I always suggest for people is like, just what if you did it just for fun, like experiment. Just see what happens and create for you, like create out of that joy and that passion and bring everything together that you want to bring to it, and then it will always evolve and change over time, but create it for you.
Mm-hmm.
But, I'm wondering, like, considering all that you mentioned, like internal motivation, the overwhelm, the getting started on things, the wanting the consistency, doing what lights you up and inspires you and fulfills you. Out of all these, like, what is it you would really like the most out of all of that? Like, what do you think is really operating?
I'm like, is this a trick question?
No, not at all.
I don't know. That's a hard question to answer. The first thing that comes to mind is I just want to have fun. I want to feel fulfilled. I think that's the primary thing.
And what will being fulfilled or feeling fulfilled, what will having that do for you?
I feel like it gives me fuel for the next thing. Like it just keeps me motivated. Yeah, it's like feeling fulfilled in one gives confidence and gratitude. I mean, this trip sitters program that I launched was kind of unexpected how it came about. And it was also very unexpected how well it went. And not that I didn't think it would go well, but it went beyond what I expected. And the feedback and just all of that was wonderful. And getting off of every single call, no matter how tired I was, every single call I would get off, I would just go like, that was awesome, And I want to feel that way. I don't want to feel less than that. I want to feel that way. Not that it's always going to be exactly like that. I don't want to like chase something either, like chase that hit, you know, but I think I'll know based on that experience whether I'm hitting the mark or close.
Great. Yeah, I was actually going to ask, what lets you know when you're fulfilled?
Yeah, with that, it was like the good positive feedback aside and like got so much great positive feedback. Even that aside, I'm not so much of like a words of affirmation person. For me, it's quality time. That's my biggest love language. And acts of service. And so giving acts of service. And so being of service and having that connection with people on those calls and just seeing the way people were responding and doing their homework and all of that just let me know that it was resonating with them. And, I would always leave those calls feeling really fulfilled and connected and all of the things embodied and grateful and, giddy at times and all of that. And so, yeah, I think it's just it's an internal knowing.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
And it's not so much about the money, although that is, I think, a natural byproduct.
Of course.
Or at least we hope it is.
Yeah. And I always say, look, like when we're operating from that place of fulfillment and that kind of regenerative energy of like, oh, I just want to do that again. And that felt so good. And it's inspiring. And now I'm motivated to do more. That's where I always say the money does become a byproduct. I mean, I've proven it. I've seen this with clients. It's like when we're really aligned and excited, then that's what motivates us, which then, it's not about the work. It's like that energy. And that's where the money does tend to just flow in. It's kind of like unlocking the door. Like we can't leave money out of the equation. I mean, there is a reality to that, but it's good to recognize. But here's a good kind of this is not a trick question. It's just something to give some deeper thought to. But what might you have to give up in order to get this fulfillment?
Well, before you finished your question, I was thinking, I think I have to give up wasting time. Like, I think I have to give up, it's not so much wasting time, it is, but it's really a byproduct of I don't like routine, and flow. I like just being in the flow, not having a routine. But I think that having more routine and structure will actually be beneficial for me. And I've been fighting it a long time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably the biggest thing, is just actually creating space.
Do you believe that you can be in flow while having structure?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. For me though, I'm realizing, and I've tried so many experiments, to use your word. I think I've found that without some sort of like, if I'm not obligated to anybody else, I have to be obligated to myself. So what that looks like for me is structuring my time better and having better boundaries with where and how I spend my time.
Boundaries with
myself mostly. Saying yes, and saying no when appropriate. But that includes even things that, not even like social obligations. I mean, just like, oh, instead of cooking lunch today, I'm just going to go to a coffee shop and waste 2 hours having lunch there instead. It's like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right. Just being more like responsible with my time.
That's interesting. What is it what stops you from having boundaries with yourself?
I think it's a rebellious spirit. It's the part of me that doesn't want to be told what to do by anybody, including myself. It's like my lower impulses are like throwing a temper tantrum most of the time.
I get it.
And my inner adult hasn't figured out how to tame that child yet.
I wonder if there'd be room for some middle ground with that kind of like the rebel child and the structured adult.
Yeah, I was meditating on Jamie Wheel's concept of the hedonistic calendar last night.
Oh, I need to hear that, but I love his work, and I could get that.
Yeah,
That's kind of how I feel. I feel like I operate with a hedonistic calendar.
yeah,
Whatever
he
it is.
says 1 day a week. Let me see if I can get this right. 1 day a week, 1 weekend a month, 1 week per year. There's something per quarter too, I think, but and basically saying like you get to do whatever you want during that time. Like if you want to eat chicken wings in bed from morning until night and watch Gilmore Girls, like go for it.
Oh yeah, I definitely have that. I personally must be, because that's kind of the negotiation I've had with myself too, is like I am very structured and work my butt off 4 days a week. And then Fridays are kind of my loose day where sometimes I work, but rarely. And yeah, like weekends are another, like weekends I don't work unless I mean, maybe once a year if I have to. But yeah, I agree with him. And I actually believe it's necessary where we have to balance and counterbalance, because if we're just, driving ourselves into the ground and not enjoying the process of sitting and like being quote structured, that's what leads to burnout. But here's the thing, and this is where, because I've had a lot of clients struggle with this. When you're inspired and you're really like, oh, I'm here, like for instance, if you just taught this class and you've gotten all this great feedback, that must have taken you some structure and time and focus to put together the class, deliver the class, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was that something that was hard for you to do, or?
Yeah, I actually think I did a good job with that, of like pacing it out. That was a good experiment for me because that was the first time I'd really I wrote probably 60,000 words. Like I basically wrote a book, and it was really inspiring also to see that I could write that much, because I would really like to write a book. And, taking all the big concepts and like narrowing them down into like a well thought out structure and all of that. I mean, it taught me how to do the thing, so that's why I say, like, I don't know why I have trouble starting things, but it's like getting that. I know it's going to be a lot of work, and I need like big chunks of time. I've never been formally diagnosed with ADHD, but my mind is definitely like squirrel energy most of the time. So knowing that I'm going to need to sit down and really focus, I usually need that's where a lot of my particular like desires or needs around space come in, is like, I know I need like at least a week to get some chunk of this done. Right. It's like they say, if you're trying to lose weight, your first like goal should be to lose as much as possible in like 10 days. Right. Mm-hmm. Just to like get that momentum and that, the momentum going. So I feel like I have that over the next few weeks. I feel like I've got like at least a week this week to really like focus and just start putting pen to paper, as they say. And again, that's why I'm really grateful for this call at this time, because it feels like it's happening on the day that I was finally like, okay, now, and I had actually forgotten. I knew we had our call coming up. Like I didn't forget that, but I had forgotten it was today. And today I woke up and I had my checklist and my morning routine. I did my morning routine. I felt great about it. It's like, how there's all these false starts when you try to start or stop something. Like if you're stopping an addiction, there can be these false starts or false stops where you're like, okay, I'm not going to smoke anymore. And then 2 days later, you're at the club, like smoking a cigarette. Totally. Sometimes it takes some time, and it actually feels like today I woke up and it like was the time, I felt like it was the time just to go for it. So I'm grateful for our call today.
Great. Awesome. Yeah. And here's the thing. It's like, everybody has to figure out what works best for them. But I always tell my clients is like, if you want to do the whole, like, okay, I'm giving this 10 days dedicated, but I'm more of the like baby steps. Like, okay, if you're going from like this other way to this new way, like just give it like, okay, this week I'm dedicating 2 days to it. Next week it'll be 3 days, or something like that.
Yeah, it's
Especially
not.
if you have other projects going on, all these
Yeah.
moving parts. It's like,
Yeah, I'm not doing too much. I'm really doing like one task a day.
yeah,
That's it. But I'm just going to do it consistently. Just one small task a day. It doesn't have to be a lot.
that's it. Exactly. There's a book that I always tell people. I recommend this book, but don't read it. Just look up there's like YouTube videos that summarize the whole book. It's called The One Thing, but it's just like, if you understand the concept, it's all you need. But it's this idea of like, we all I have to-do lists that sometimes have things on it for 3 years, like literally it was like start a podcast for 3 years. And I knew that it wasn't the number one priority at the time, but it was always on the list. But every day or every week, it was like, okay, what is the one thing I have to do this week that will then lead to the next things? It's like the one biggest, and usually for a lot of people, it's like the one thing that we actually don't want to do or that we're avoiding, or it's like the scariest or the biggest task. But if we just tackle that one thing first, it's like that intrinsic motivation comes through just by getting that one little task done. It's like, oh, I mean, I will say I'm guilty of it myself. I've had an article, like a very simple article on my to-do list for literally 11 and a half months. And they probably won't even want the article anymore. But it's kind of been low priority. But I was like, I'm so sick of even looking at this. Let me just get it done, And now that it's done, it's like, ooh, new energy. Like now there's space. And so it's like more room for creation. And that's the irony is, most people get overwhelmed. But if we just, get all of our thoughts on, and I actually do use paper, like notebook and paper, get all the like shoulds and things that we think we need to do out on a paper, and then just go back and it's like, okay, which one of these is not the easiest, but would make me like, is either the hardest or the first that needs to get done, that would then make me feel, like, okay, good, I got that done. Now I'm motivated to get the next thing. And so it's like, eating the elephant one bite at a time, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not about overwhelming and making it hard. But I'm glad you enjoyed this. The one thing I would get curious about more, and the reason why I ask these particular questions is, a lot of times it's like with business, especially, people think, oh, I just need to go do these things, but I'm stopped. It's usually never the actions. Like the actions you already know how to do. You've done this before. You just written 60,000 pages and delivered this whole program for, this company. So then, yeah, you already know you can do this for yourself. But it's usually these deeper layers of like, well, what's operating behind the scenes? Like where's, maybe even the fear or the doubts or the launch trauma or the rebel, just being aware of like, well, there's this part of me that doesn't want to schedule, I mean, trust me, I get it. I'm a Sagittarius. I'm like, I'm a 7 manifesting generator too. Like part of me is like, oh, I just want to play. But what if you actually just played and like had fun and were we're a rebel, but then dedicated, one day a week or, a few hours a week to like, okay, the rebel's going to just be like chilling and like focusing, but it's not like throwing it away. And also being aware that like, when you have some structure or a fair amount of structure, it actually allows for more flow. But it's not about being always structured, but it's like that balance of like when you actually have some kind of process in place, what it does is then it frees up a lot of energy to then allow in for the flow and creativity. And which is kind of seems counterintuitive, but it's something to just play with and explore. But yeah, this is really good. I will also say, just as someone who has seen this before, if you just taught this workshop or this class that you taught ended recently.
Yeah. Yeah, just a few weeks ago.
And so you were exposed to what, 30, 40 people, you said? Do they know what you offer out there?
Yeah, I mean they do. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you mention to them that you have this Rebel Heart program coming out?
No, but I also am mindful with this particular program not to sell anything
Yeah.
until the program concludes. So,
Yeah.
yeah, for those that want to be on the newsletter and stuff, they'll get that notification.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's never, I mean, that's of course, like we don't go to someone else's thing to sell our own, but this is where I always recommend like planting your own seeds. You know, it's like you're showing up as a leader, as a teacher, you know, people are looking up to you. And, you know, depending on what your contract is, like you still are putting your own work out there into the world. So there's always a way to, you know, plant your own seeds and like let them grow as, you know, like you're now getting free exposure to a lot of other people's, you know, audiences and, you know, use it to your benefit. I mean, that's kind of, you know, depending if they're blatantly like, no, we don't want anybody even knowing about you. But usually that's kind of when you do collaborations like this, that's the benefit. It's like, well, now you're getting more exposure to new people. How can you then benefit from that? You know, but they don't know, you know, unless you kind of plant a little seed. And there's a way to do that without selling or being weird or sleazy, but there's a way to, you know, share stories, share about what you have going on, you know, let people know. Even if it's not like out there in the world, it's like you can actually let people know. I just did this a few days ago. I said, oh, I'm launching this program in late September. It's like, I haven't put it together. It's not done. I have an idea. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to say I'm doing it and then I'll whip it together and see what happens, you know, and just have fun with it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good. It's a good reminder to always plant some seeds.
Yeah. So how are you feeling? Has this process been a little helpful or?
Yeah. Yeah. Always brings new awareness in, you know, it's fun to just hear yourself say something out loud or you're like, oh yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Because I think it's easy for us to kind of lie to ourselves, you know, and we know, I mean, it happens so many times in psychedelic ceremonies, you know, someone comes out and they say, well, it's stuff I already knew. And I say, yeah, were you listening before? Maybe you'll listen now. You know?
I always say it's like, you need another reminder. You need another reminder. You need another reminder. I'm like, oh, again. You know, but that's the human experience, right? And it's, you know, obviously I know you're skilled enough to not go into the shame spiral of like, oh, but it's, you know.
I've been plenty. I've spent many years in the shame spiral. I'm just, at this point, you know, I actually wrote a Substack on this called 4 Gremlins in a Box. And
love it.
I had this vision a couple years ago. I was having like really deep in the shame spiral. And I saw the shame as 4 little shadowy gremlins with like little devil tails and like, you know, kind of like hyena-ish looking, carrying a giant box, running around my apartment trying to like cover me with this box. And I was like, oh, that's what shame's like. Shame is like 4 little gremlins carrying like a refrigerator box trying to cover you up with it, you know, like there's no point to it. It just makes you small and puts out your light. So now whenever I feel shame, I'm like, there's those gremlins.
The little gremlins.
They don't scare me as bad anymore.
It's funny. I went on a major, what was it? 4-year journey with a gremlin inside my field that kept moving. It kept moving. And I was like, I remember when it got to my heart, I was like, okay, it's in my heart. That's good now. Like there's progress, but wow. Yeah, it's a deep journey and you're right. I always say, look, like, it's not easy to train ourselves and to really like deprogram and like reprogram. But generally there was a day where I was just like, you know what, this is such a waste of my energy, period. That's it. Like, and now when I go into the shame spiral, I do it very quickly because I'm like, you know what, I have other things I want to be doing.
Yeah, totally.
It's like just not worth it.
I'm like, you done yet? No? Okay. Just torture yourself for as long as you want. It's fine. Just do your thing.
Just watch it. Like, okay, are you done? Great. Let's move on. You know, can't bypass it, can't push it away, but I just don't let it take over. I know I have a client going through this right now so hard. And I'm like, oh my God, it's just kind of like you just keep going in the downward spiral of like, one thing doesn't work and then it just adds to the fuel. And I'm like, you gotta like, there's a certain level of like, we have to be just stop and be conscious and watch the mind and our patterns and our ways, and also like for me, I call it my addiction to suffering. It's like, oh, am I just
Well, it's funny you say
this?
that because when I work with clients with addiction, it's usually exactly where I start is the shame spiral, because that, like for me, it took me so long to quit drinking alcohol. I mean, I owned a brewery, and so when I finally was ready to quit drinking, it took so many times and so many failed attempts, and I'd tell all my friends I was going to stop and then I wouldn't stop. And, just like all this shame. And it's like, I'd wake up in the morning and go, oh, you stupid, I can't believe you did that again. All the shame floods in. And it's like, okay, well, maybe we just start by meeting that part with compassion first. And then we can move on.
God.
Don't worry about stopping drinking. Just worry about meeting your shame with compassion.
First things first. Yeah. Oh my God.
Because if you can meet your shame with compassion, then you easily give up the alcohol, not easily, but easier than it was before. Yeah.
Little by little. Oh my God. So good. Well, thank you, Dan. Thanks for sharing that. That's so big. And by the way, I commend you because I still haven't given up, but I'm in a good, healthy relationship, but
Yeah, we were in an abusive relationship. So I said, at least for 1 year, I'm not drinking for 1 year. And
that's great.
That was in October. And, I feel like if I can go a year, then the addiction doesn't have a hold of me anymore.
That's amazing.
And if I decide to start drinking again in October, maybe we'll see. I don't have any desire to at this moment, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. Yeah. I mean, and the older I get, the more and more I'm like, I just don't enjoy this at all anymore. So it's like here and there, but you might want to drink on election day. That's another story.
I will tell you, I really miss margaritas. That's probably the thing I miss most.
That's so funny.
Gosh. Margaritas.
Have you had, I'm sorry, but have you had this Gia, Ghia? Do you know this brand?
No.
Oh my God. I tell everybody about it. I think this has been my saving grace. I tend to like wine and there's nothing has been a good replacement for wine, but this brand, it's like a non-alcoholic herbal thing that's kind of billed as like a, cocktail. They make a kind of a margarita-esque one. I'm telling you, this brand is amazing. I love that they cost more than most alcoholic drinks, which I find really funny. But they sell these little cans, and I love Negronis. And they sell one that's like kind of Negroni-esque, and it has like a lot of good herbs and very low sugar, and it's like kind of healthy too. So that's been my indulgence. I just buy these, and I think they're like $6 or $7 a can, something like that. But they are pretty amazing. So
it's about the cost of a Bud Light in Austin and in Denver. So
that's how I justify it. I'm like, you know what? This is probably what I'd spend on alcohol anyways, so it's fine, and it makes me feel good. It fulfills my like physical need to hold something at a party, that's usually where I, that gets me the most.
Yep. I get it.
Well, before we go, Sarah, tell people a little bit about where they can find you, website. I know you're not on Instagram for now, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, they can still add me on Instagram. My handle is Miss Sarah Hannah. So MS Sarah Hannah. And I have a website, lovetothepeople.org. It's all spelled out. No numbers, just lovetothepeople.org. And then I do have a Substack as well, which I believe it's just sarahhannah.substack.com, if I'm not mistaken.
Beautiful. And then we will be watching for this Rebel-esque program to come out.
That's like that emoji. That's like...
I was just talking to someone. I don't know if... Oh, yeah, you did see that episode with Lawrence Cole, the grief elder. Oh, my God. I'm telling you, I think the grief medicine is so important right now. And I actually, every time I've gone through grief portals myself, I'm like, why are there not more grief coaches out there? Like, why are not, but people bringing it, I mean, I love this idea of bringing it in with the other work and not just the grief, but like, because it's all encompassing. So I would encourage you to bring it out together with the whole shebang.
Yeah. I feel like grief is, it's so necessary right now. And it's actually a superpower. That's what I'm starting to realize, is that when we're in touch with our grief, it's actually a superpower. And I think just having open hearts, is what might be what saves the world. Just, learning to grieve what was, and grieving lost dreams or expectations or whatever. It's like, the faster we can let go of something that's broken, the faster we can build whatever's coming up, whatever's new. So,
yes.
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait to see what you put out there.
Aww. Thanks.
Well, thank you for doing this fun experiment. I hope it was good.
It was fun.
Please let us know what comes about, and hopefully there's a energy moving. I mean, it's Leo time, so why not? It's a good time.
Well, now that it's out here, it's like I am being held accountable in a way. So
I'll follow
mission
up on
fulfilled.
I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're feeling inspired, I'd appreciate it if you showed your love with a review. And check out my YouTube channel where you can find the video version of this podcast. You can also head to bethaweinstein.com to learn more about me and grab my free business growth trainings. Remember, you carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times.